Hi, welcome to this week's Authors Love Readers podcast, where we delve into the stories behind the stories. We're asking authors questions, some of them fun, some of them serious, and from their answers, you're going to learn things you never knew about the people who write the stories you love. My name is Patricia McLinn. I'm your host and designated question asker.
I'm Julia Kent and Meli Raine, and I'm an author who loves readers.
Now, let's start the show. Hi, and welcome to this week's edition of the Authors Love Readers podcast. I am delighted to have with me this week a person of many names and many talents. Let's say I knew her first as Julia Kent, and I was trying to remember. I think we met first at the New England chapter conference a few years ago, and then through Novelist Inc. I think that's right.
I think so.
Yeah, there's an ongoing thread here of people I've known through Novelist Inc. or met here. But either way, we've been known to hang out in a bar now and then. And I would invite you now, because you have so many names and talents, tell us some about what you're writing.
Oh, goodness. Well, first of all, thank you. It's great to be here. What am I writing right now? I am finishing up an end of May release. So that is a Meli Raine book. And it is the end of a romantic suspense trilogy that is a political thriller.
Ooh.
Yes. And it is not a ripped from the headlines thriller, because I plotted it 3 years ago, and yet real life is starting to parallel my carefully plotted plot.
Isn't that wild?
It is. So I'm at the end of that right now.
And are those aren't your first 3 Meli Raine books? You've done other Meli Raine books.
No, these are, so this is my 12th Meli Raine book. I write them in trilogies. So this is the 4th trilogy.
So within those trilogies, a reader could come in at any point and pick up the first book of the trilogy and then go back to a previous trilogy?
Yes. They're self-contained trilogies. You would understand, the world itself would be much larger if you read all of the books before, but they are designed to be self-contained. So the entry points are at any of the first books of the trilogies.
And how dark are these books?
That depends on your definition of dark. And I say that because I have had dark romance fans get upset that my books aren't dark enough. And I've had regular romantic suspense fans, and by regular I mean non-dark romance fans, say that the books are too dark. And I take the term dark romance to generally mean an anti-hero. And I don't write anti-heroes. So I don't write heroes who are extremely dark in their, or almost borderline evil, who are then redeemed. I write heroes who either are keeping secrets because of their jobs, whether it's working in the DEA or working in private security or being ex-military, ex-special ops, who are placed in extraordinary circumstances where they have to help to solve a mystery and protect the woman that they love.
Well, I think that explains it very well. And I was thinking about how these shortcut terms a lot of times don't serve us well, as readers especially.
Yes. That's a really good way of putting it, because in my Meli Raine books, there are definitely darker themes. I have some of the villains in the books do horrific things to various people. And the violence on the page is generally, it's done to move the plot along. If it's done by a villain, then it's that villain always has to have their comeuppance. meaning the hero or the heroine has to bring them down.
Mm-hmm.
But and so in that sense, there are darker themes. So everything from narco trafficking and sex slave trafficking to political thrillers where hit jobs are ordered, or worse even than assassinations or hit jobs are ordered on various people in political circles. But there's always, because it's romance, there's always a happily ever after, which can seem very impossible at various points in my series. but the themes are darker. I would say, though, that the heroes are not.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I love mysteries. I love mysteries probably more than what I think of as suspense or thrillers. I like some suspense too. I have this theory that mysteries are whodunit. Suspense is, will the main character survive, and thrillers are, will the world survive.
Ooh, I like that.
Thank you. I'm trying bit by bit to get the world on my wagon. I don't know how far we're going to get with this, but I also know I was looking for a book on an online retailer the other day. Actually, I'll say it was on iBooks. And they drive me nuts because they lump them all together. And to me, they're such very good books. And I saw this one and I thought, well, okay. And I opened it up. And the first line of the description is, after a teenage girl is found mutilated and tortured. And I went, no, okay, I'm skipping that one. So although it could have dealt with that in a way that would have been palatable to me, leading with that turned me right away. Does that make sense?
And that's, yes. But it's hard. I think it's hard because as authors, especially as indie authors who are responsible for our blurbs and writing the descriptions, rather, you need to write something that's gripping.
Yes.
And that's eye-catching, that's attention-getting. And for some people, that would be enough to make them stop, read the whole thing, because they're compelled to say, whoa, what happened? On the other hand, for other people, they're immediately going to be like, nope, not my thing. And that's the great part about the sheer large scope of publishing, is that we can all find something that we like. But you're right about the fact that lumping in suspense and thrillers and mystery doesn't necessarily do readers a service.
I feel that very strongly, because I'm a mystery reader, I think, and there are fewer of those surfacing through that than there are of the others. And there's also the difficulty, and as I said, that book, it could have dealt with that theme in a way that I would like as a reader. But I don't know, that's so hard as a writer to express it in a way that's going to make that clear. My mysteries have people die. They're not murder mysteries. People don't die. So, and a lot of the times they're annoying, but sometimes even nice people die. And yet the approach to it, I like to say that my characters take death serious, or take murder seriously, but not life. So,
there you go.
That's one way. But how do you convey that time after time in a blurb without saying the same line over and over? And we got way off, as I am wont to do,
as we do,
and as you and I have done a time or two. So we haven't even gotten to your other primary. Is that fair?
Yes.
Persona. So tell us some about Julia Kent.
So Julia Kent writes quirky romantic comedies that are not as light as one would think once you actually read them, and yet they are. And so my romantic comedies tend to be focused on people who are at first unaware of the fact that they are their own obstacle in life.
Mm.
And once they get out of their own way, then the love can come in. And so that, if I had to have a theme to my romantic comedy, that would be it. Whether it's dealing with an intense issue or dealing with, a lighter, fluffy kind of a thing. And so I have a lot of fun writing across all of the series that I write with my romantic comedy. I have a new book coming out, a much anticipated book coming out on April 24th. It is Shopping for a Billionaire's Baby, and it is my main couple from my Shopping for a Billionaire series, which is about a mystery shopper who meets a billionaire while she's evaluating the cleanliness of the men's room in one of his stores. And they met 12 books ago. So this is Lucky 13. And they're having a baby. And it only took me 30,000 words to get her pregnant. Which I realized later.
A very enjoyable 30,000 words, right?
Yeah. They had a lot of fun. But what was supposed to be a 70,000 word book turned into 108,000 words.
How that happens, isn't it?
Woo! Well, and it was one of those moments as a writer where I later realized I literally could have had a 30,000 word novella and a 78,000 word book and gotten the novella out and done all, but that's not how it worked. So it's a little too late.
Yeah, and sometimes the muse just doesn't, the muse is not a business person. Let's mine isn't. I guess some people's are. And one of the things I want when you were talking about the they aren't. I think they are as amusing as you might expect, but they also give you some meat and potatoes. Does that make sense? And so I want the readers who want some heft are going to enjoy the books, and readers who like the humor are going to enjoy the books.
Yes. There's one of the themes in this series that gets kind of serious is the hero's mother died in a situation when he was younger, when he was 17, where he's left feeling responsible for it. He's not, but he's left feeling responsible for it. And he has a very tense relationship with his father. And after there's this sort of a reconciliation that takes place, even though they've interacted with each other, they've worked in the same business together, but it's definitely a relationship that changes by the end of this book. And it's a moment that you get to put into contemporary romance that makes the ending even fuller.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something, it's that family sense that comes, especially when you're writing a longer series. So that part's very exciting to be able to do that. I don't want to spoil it.
No, you don't. Absolutely don't spoil it for the readers. Yeah, I think a lot of stories are not so much what happens as how they're handled. That you could take the same set of circumstances and you could write a fun book. You could write a really dour book. You could write a mystery out of it. You could write a romance out of it. So I like that there's some heft there, and yet lots of amusement.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. There's and baby books, kind of lend themselves to that.
What would you be doing if you weren't writing now?
I would probably still be a university administrator and professor. That was my last job.
Professor
that I had before. I taught history, and occasionally I taught government classes, American government. And so my focus was on U.S. history, world history. When some schools hired me, I taught Latin American history because that had been my specialty.
Any temptation to write history now in fiction?
So I have tried writing historical fiction, and I have a pen name that will not be uttered from way back when that no longer exists, because my first book was a historical romance. And I thought, well, I was a history professor for 20 years. I can write historical romance better than anyone, right? Of course. And it failed miserably. I made every mistake you could imagine. And that's okay, because I learned from them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I definitely have thought about it. I really find that, so part of why I moved into contemporary romance is that I could not stop writing humor into things. And the more I wrote, the more I realized, and it's not that you can't write funny historical romance. You can, certainly. Look at Julia Quinn.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't have the balance. There was something that wasn't working. So I have thought about it. I have historical fiction ideas, not romance. And someday I may end up writing those. But for now, the two are separate. But yeah, if I weren't doing this, I probably would still be working in universities.
Did your colleagues think you were crazy to leave? To do this in particular?
Yes and no. When I left my job, I left because I was making more than enough money in self-publishing to justify it. So the month that I left, I made as much that month as I made in a year at my job.
Ooh.
And that was the sign.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also left because at the time, my youngest, who has some pretty significant special needs, was struggling and was in part-time daycare, but was having serious issues. And it became increasingly clear, and I worked part-time. It became increasingly clear that there were enough things converging to say I needed to be more accessible to him. And he's since flourishing.
Oh.
And not just because mommy came home and was with him. It became a balance. So my husband was able to quit his job a year later and become the full-time stay-at-home dad. And publishing has allowed me to help to get him therapies and to cover medical things. And he's doing really well. But yeah, my colleagues, I didn't tell. I only told 2 people about the publishing. So I just kind of quietly slipped away and said, I need to be home with my son. And the 2 people, though, in my world at the university who knew, were incredibly supportive. So that was great.
When I was working at the Post and first starting way back when, you were probably in diapers. When my first book came out, or when I was submitting, the only person who...
When did your first book come out?
1990.
Oh, I was 20. So I wasn't in diapers. Although that's pretty close.
Yeah, thanks. The only person who knew before I sold was the Kay, who's now my executive assistant.
Nice.
So we often say that what she first knew about publishing was listening to me bitch for 23 years.
I like that. It's funny because my husband reminded me last year of the fact that it must have been 1997, we were living in Cambridge, and I was working at Harvard Law School in a administrative support job. And I said something, and I was writing, but I wasn't writing romance, but I was writing creative fiction and creative nonfiction just on the side. And I remember saying to him, there are all these romance novels, and someone's writing them. I wonder how you do that. I wish there were like a place or a book or something. And I just didn't have any connections at all. I was completely immersed in academia, and nobody's going to tell you how to write for Harlequin in academia.
No.
So it's funny because who knows if I had known that back then that RWA even existed. I don't know if I would have been writing back then or not.
Well, what got you started in writing in the first place? And that's that sort of ties into, uh, uh, there's sort of a group of questions I want to ask that have to do with sort of your personal history with story and then how you get to be writing. So I'd like to know if there's a book that you can remember from childhood that really kind of turned you on to story, and or in your pre-author days, if there was a story or movie or something that I think for a lot of us, there's a moment where you go, that's the ending? That's the ending they came up with? That's wrong. No, no, no. And we at least mentally rewrite it. So what was your path from being a non-writer to being a writer?
Yeah, wow. So my grandmother was one of the founding librarians of one of the libraries in my home, not my hometown, but the region, because she lived 2 towns over from us. And when I was really little, like 5, when we would go to visit her, she would bring me to work, and I could alphabetize at 5, and I would sit in the back, and they would pay me with cookies, and I would alphabetize all the cards. And back then, this is going to show my age. You would return your book, and there would be a card in the back, and they would have us. I think it was the card with the timestamps.
Oh, yes.
And it would have the title of the book and the author, and I had to alphabetize. And I don't remember this memory, but my grandmother told it for years, that the first time she brought me back there, the ladies thought she was joking when she said, I'm going to put her here and give her a box of cards to organize, and that I pretty quickly got them right. The only thing I couldn't get right was the mix, the MCs. I didn't understand. I thought that was all just one, it all blended. And then I got these amazing cookies from the bakery across the street as a reward. So that, I spent so many times, or so much time at that library all the way until 8th, 9th grade as a volunteer, just hanging out. And my grandmother worked there and retired, but I still, we went there regularly. And I read every book that they had in that place. And I mean, I moved over and I was reading the adult books that I wasn't supposed to, the Sidney Sheldons and and all of that. But the book as a child, there were 2 series when I was really little, like, 8 or 9. I remember The Great Brain, which was a series of books set in what I understand now is Mormon, Utah. I didn't get the concept at the time. And they're just these funny books about this Mormon family and this, kind of troublemaker kid. And that series got me really like, oh, there's a series I can read more. And of course, the Little House books, which, I think every girl I knew read those. But A Wrinkle in Time was a huge one. That was the first time I read a book obsessively over and over and over again. And I remember just being so immersed in it and then realizing, like, this is a woman who wrote this. Oh, women can write books. It wasn't like some big revelation, but it was definitely like, oh, you can do this. And in 3rd grade, I was able to take a like kind of a poetry class from a poet, like an actual poet came to our school.
Wow.
Yeah, it was the 70s. There was money for that kind of experimental education. And so I learned about haiku, and I thought how cool haiku was. And so the idea that you could play with language, as an 8, 9-year-old was a big deal. So, and I started writing stuff down as a little kid, but I started writing for pay when I was 16. I had a column in the local weekly newspaper in Akron, Ohio. And I made $5 a column, 2 columns.
What was the topic?
It was sports at my high school and everything else. so, so it was like speech club or the choir concert or that kind of thing. And so what I thought was cool is I got to call all the team captains of the boys sports teams and later girls sports as we acquired girls sports teams and ask them, so what were the scores? Or like, what were the major things that happened? But I made $10 a week writing that column or those columns. But that was the early stuff for me, like the early foundational, this is what I want to do kind of
And
thing.
did you get a lot of encouragement? Like, did the editor say of that newspaper say you got to make this your life's calling, or did how did teachers and people you encountered with the writing react to your early writings?
Oh boy. No, the editor, in fact, I don't know that I met the editor more than once. It was like a drop the column off thing. It was very very informal. But I was involved in, I went to some local journalism conferences for high schoolers. The newspaper in my town was the Akron Beacon Journal, and up north was the Plain Dealer, and in Cleveland.
Yep.
Those were our two bit. The ABJ, I read that daily. And I actually got started in with a loose interest in journalism from my grandmother, who encouraged me to write letters to the editor.
This is the same librarian,
yep,
grandmother?
Yep.
And can you share the name of the library?
Oh, it's no longer called this, but it was called the McDowell Public Library in Fairlawn, Ohio. And now it's just a branch of the Akron Summit County Library system. Okay. But back then she was her name was on the plaque, and
cool.
It was pretty neat. But
yeah.
But I'd been writing letters to the editor on major social topics and smaller ones like fund our school levy, kind of a thing. In Ohio, voters vote to support, or at least they did back then. I have no idea whether the tax structure is the same, but back then voters would actually vote to raise property taxes for schools, and ours was very low in terms of funding. And I wrote letters to support voting for the levy, that kind of thing. But then teachers supporting my writing, that's it's a mixed bag. I had one of my more formative negative experiences was a teacher my junior year of high school who
me too, same year.
She so I simultaneously in that year managed to get one of the very rare 100 points out of her for an essay, and had her corner me at my locker and inform me that I didn't have the discipline to become a writer, a professional writer. And I still remember that. And that was crushing. So, I mean, getting the 100 out of her was great. And that same year, we were given the task of going to the local university and writing a very intense literary criticism of Moby Dick. And I remember walking into the university library, and I still to this day remember the feeling of, I wish I could just come here every day and not go to school and just sit and read and go through the microfiche. and if you just let me do that, I would learn so much more than I am learning in school. But I wrote this lit crit essay, and I remember it was the first time I was like, oh, so they're themes, themes. like, oh, so that's what that means when the crow shows up in that scene. It was, putting it all together was really fascinating to me. But that teacher telling me I would never become a professional writer because I didn't have the discipline to do it.
My junior year English teacher told me that I was not a writer, was never going to be a writer, and I might as well give up. Interestingly, early in the year, there'd been a parent-teacher conference with my parents in which she told them that I didn't have thoughts of my own.
Oh.
And not only did my parents, but also the principal, who'd known the family for a while, all kind of said, "Pat, are we talking about the same person?" And at the end of the year, there was another parent-teacher conference in which she told these same people, she just goes off on her own. She just, won't follow along. So yeah, it was not a good experience. But then, so I want to ask you too, in my senior year in high school, I had an English teacher, and this was the advanced English course, and he was very kind of distant and cool, and not how some teachers are kind of involved with the students.
Yeah.
He was not. He was not involved with them at all, and he was really strict, but he was so fair. Where she'd had favorites, and clearly I was not one of them.
Yes.
And I often think that as bad as she was for me, well, I can't say as bad as she was for me, because part of me said, "Oh yeah,
Oh yes.
oh yeah." But then that switch to the senior year teacher was so important and so vital. It wasn't even so much what she did as what was the follow-up going to be. So how did you come from that teacher who said you weren't going to have the discipline? How'd you progress from there?
I ended in my senior year of high school. I had AP English and a very nice teacher, but similar in the sense that not very involved, and the grading there was very little attention to the actual work. You just got a grade. So I was happy to get A pluses, but no input, and or very little input. And I went off to college. I was going to be a physics major. That lasted one semester. Calc, chem, all of it. I think I made it through Calc 3 or Calc 2 and just said, nope, I'm done, and moved over to political science. And I just decided that I was able to do well with the lit crit. I was able to do well with analytical writing. And I had dreams of being my version of Mike Royko back then. I was going to be like this political commentaries person. And I had wanted to go to Northwestern and had gotten in but couldn't afford it. And decided that I would go with political science rather than journalism. And so I did very well as a writer and went on to grad school and just didn't write fiction for a very long time. I started writing some essays. And then when I was 23 and in grad school, I sat down and wrote an entire novel, which was a big deal. I had done short stories here and there, but
to finish one at 23, yeah.
I did. I wrote it, and I actually have dug it up, and I had it converted to, a regular file. It was just a printout, and it's awful. It's absolutely like it's beyond awful. There's like a 4-page scene where I describe how the heroine scrambles eggs. I mean, it's just like it's just.
But you finished it. That's phenomenal.
I did, but it's it's just so sad. But I finished it, and I did, and I put it away.
Okay, I think you should put that 4-page scene up on your website for your readers.
It's just.
I think they would find it inspiring.
It's so bad. It has monologues that make like Ayn Rand look like an amateur. I mean, it's just yeah. I have had a few. I mentioned it once to some readers. They're like, "We want to read it." I was like, "No, no."
Well, I don't know if you knew. I went to Northwestern.
Oh no, I didn't know.
Yeah. Oh. So my undergraduate degree is in English composition.
Oh wow,
which is really practical. And actually, how it happened is I came in with advanced placement credit, and I realized sometime in my junior year that I probably was going to go for journalism because I'd been interested in psychology until I found out you had to take statistics. No, not going to do this. And then I was thinking I was maybe history professor, maybe, English professor. And one of the things that turned me off the idea of English professor was a class in writing where we would bring in our pieces and pass them around and discuss them. It was basically a critique group within a class.
Yeah.
And people were telling me what I meant by my story. And I said, no, I didn't. And this guy says, you're wrong. And to me, what that said was a lot of literary criticism was baloney.
Oh, yeah.
It was people who had no clue stating what they thought. So it really turned me off. So I went toward journalism at that point and realized I could either transfer undergrad to the Medill School of Journalism and get an undergrad degree in 4 years. Or I could look at what courses I'd taken so far, see what degree it would get me in 3 years, and get the master's in the 4th. And so for the same amount of money, 2 degrees.
Oh, that's awesome.
But that meant I declared my major the same day I petitioned to graduate, which made them a little cranky, but I got through it.
That's great.
And I had a ball. I had a really great time at Northwestern.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I'm sorry you didn't get to go.
Well, I survived. But yeah,
I know.
I love it there.
And I think that's personal philosophizing here. I think it's so much has to do with how you react to the school, and it has a lot more to do with who the student is than what the school is.
Yes.
On how successful somebody is in college.
Yeah,
we've gotten way off.
But that's okay.
Yeah, what the heck. So let me ask you a couple real quick questions just to let readers know you more. Favorite taste?
Like taste, like flavor?
Yeah.
Oh, well, sweet.
Yay. Okay. Favorite color and why? Do you have something associated with it?
Oh, green and purple are my 2 favorites. Green especially, but I don't have anything associated. I just like it.
Okay. Just like them. I have this bizarre little desert island that oddly will let you play movies, but only 3. I don't know why, but only 3. And you never get to see anything else. So which 3 movies are you going to watch?
Okay.
Over and over and over.
Oh, boy. There is a movie that came out in 91 called Mind Walk. And it's not well known, and it's one of my favorites. And it stars Sam Waterston, Liv Ullmann, and John Hurd. So that would be one of them.
Oh, interesting. What's it about?
Mind Walk. It is about a failed presidential candidate from the United States who is sort of licking his wounds and goes to this medieval French monastery thing that's built into this giant rock. It's very existential feeling. And there is I don't know what she is, if she's a physics professor, but she's this high level, very mathematical science professor who's there. And they just sit around and talk. It's hard to describe, but that is one of my favorites. And years ago, my husband actually tracked it down on VHS and bought it for me.
Oh, what a great present.
Yeah. So
I was actually thinking it sounds a little like a writer's conference, but okay, go ahead.
So that would be one. Can I do an entire mini series, or is it just a movie?
I thank you for asking, because most of the writers just say, I'm doing a series. So you can count a series. People have broken that ground.
Okay, Outlander. I need the Outlander mini series. And, oh boy, another one. Garden State with Zach Braff and Natalie Portman.
Okay. Wow, very interesting, and I don't see a connection among them.
No, there's not.
Well, maybe this one for each of your personas.
There you go.
Okay, let's start with some of the reader questions, because I love that they bless their hearts for taking the time to send them in. And everybody can send questions to podcasts@authorslovereaders.com. So we'll start with a classic one. Where do your stories come from? And this reader says that she knows an author who dreams her stories. Another has a character suddenly taking up residence in her head. So how are your beautiful stories born? And then I would ask you, does it vary depending on what kind of story you're writing?
So there's this guy named Guido who lives in New Jersey, and I pay him to just feed me story ideas. Yeah, it's pretty cool. There's like a whole network of us all being fed by Guido. Now, that's how it feels sometimes. Hey, Guido, here's $150. Give me a story idea. I have no idea. I really don't. The two story ideas that have hit me out of the frickin' blue, like boom, done, entire, like the muse opened up on top of my head kind of a moment, were a book I wrote called Random Acts of Crazy, where I was driving down the highway and this voice just started talking to me. And I came home and wrote 10,000 words, like just boom, in one day. And she was from the part of Ohio, about an hour southwest of where I'm from, roughly. And there's a kind of a distinct regional dialect there. And she just talked to me in that voice. And I had no plans to write that book. None. Zero. Zippo. And out it came. And that ended up being my first New York Times bestseller. So that was kind of cool. But I don't, and the second idea is a new series that I'm writing right now that no one knows about, where the idea was like this little seed, this little idea, like what if? And I sat on it for about 3 months. I have a Mac, and there's this notes file. And I abuse that thing. I put everything in there. And so I literally have like 2,000 or 3,000 notes where I just come up with these things, and they're like random things that just make no sense in there, like chicken fetish leash jelly beans, and eventually it means something. But I don't have a specific place where the stories come from. They just do.
So a lot of your books are in series, though. And another reader has asked if we miss the characters when we're done with a book, and the reader clearly does, think about and miss the characters after. And does that? I said, does that not then, which is putting words into your mouth, does that then spawn additional books in the series? Or do you know, starting the series, do you know you're going to write a series?
No. So I stumbled into this career. And I say that, I really mean that. And the way that I've organized my books reflects that. Meaning I had no intention of writing, when I wrote Random Acts of Crazy, for instance, I was not thinking that I was going to write anything else for those characters. And if I could go back in time and do it over again, I would completely change the way I organized the series. And that's true for almost every single one of my series. So it's only recently that I have begun to think in terms of series when I write. So when I wrote my first shopping series book, it was, I'm going to write this, and I'm writing it for a charity box set that I had been invited into. Brenda Novak, who is wonderful, was doing a charity box set to raise money for juvenile diabetes research. And we raised $100,000, which was amazing.
That's fabulous.
But I just knew I needed to write something, and I wanted to write something a little different. And so I didn't go into it planning it, but I left it open-ended. Now I do think in terms of series. But when I finish a book, sometimes I miss the characters. I think of them as it's kind of like I'm their queen. And They're just sitting, hanging out, waiting for me to come back. So,
Oh, I like that. I don't think I think my characters run the show. I don't feel like I feel more like the servant.
oh, I have moments like that. Oh yeah. Sometimes I literally shout at my computer, "Why are you making me do this?"
So with doing these very different kinds of books, which I would think would require really different kinds of research too. Do you approach it differently, or how do you do that, especially when you're working on them simultaneously?
Yeah, it depends on what the specific details are. The contemporary romance, I was a mystery shopper when I write my shopping series.
Yeah.
I was a mystery shopper. So that I have the actual experience doing. For romantic suspense, most of what I write is political thriller, and I was a political science professor.
Uh,
And but I do certainly have to do research on, guns and is this person really covered by the Secret Service or not? Okay, well, or rank in the particular military that somebody was in. With the shifters, the series that I write with a co-author who's also a rom-com author, our Diana Sear books are called the Billionaire Shifters Club, and so we've built an increasingly elaborate mythology. It's almost urban fantasy on top of shifter romance. And so recently, we I had to dig into some mythology, like real
oh
mythology,
wow. Yeah.
in certain cultures in order to tie some imaginary world building things in. Like we were trying to basically give this loose connection, and I hit the jackpot when I realized.
Uh,
I'm being cagey on purpose because I don't want to spoil this in
yeah.
case any Diana Sear readers are listening. But it was really great. It was one of those exciting moments when it turns out something that you thought you
That's
came up
so
with in your
wonderful.
head has been for centuries or millennia believed by a particular culture, and it's like, yes, there are shifters in that culture, this is perfect. So it's, I do the same research most people do, meaning I sit in front of my computer in my bathrobe drinking coffee, googling. um,
And are
but
you doing it before you start a story or during the
no.
writing process as the need comes up?
So I literally will write a scene and I'll have brackets that will say insert. So my husband's my first reader. So sometimes I'll say insert football expletive here. And his job is to go in and insert football crap there. And sure enough, it comes out sounding perfectly great. And I sound like I know what I'm talking about. But for me, when I'm writing and I'm in that flow, I would rather mark it as, add detail here and go
Yeah.
back to it.
So another reader wants to know, and I'm going to combine this. They want to know about your favorite place to write, and I also want and very sweetly they ask if we have an inspirational view, and I want to know if you also have a routine.
I don't have a routine.
Me
I wish
either.
I did. I've tried. I try. Um, I write wherever I can. I currently am officeless. So we have
Oh,
a fairly small house, and we have 4 bedrooms, and we have 3 children. And my middle child finally about 2 years ago said, I'm tired of sharing a room with a 6-year
mm,
old. So we had a 13 and a 6-year old sharing a room. And so they wanted separate, well, he wanted a separate room. So I moved my office into my bedroom, which, so my view is a wall. I occasionally look out the window at woods, but they're woods that lead up a hill to a power plant at
oh
the
dear.
local university. So in the when in the spring and summer, it's actually a fine view because the leaves are in, and otherwise it's got
Hmm.
this like very Soviet era kind of look to it. But it's
I do tend to write more romantic suspense during
staring
the
staring
winter.
at the smokestack. There you go.
Yeah.
Um, but I write anywhere. Um, the perfect scenario for me is no internet, nothing else to do, bored out of my mind, because I have to keep myself occupied. And but that I can only that requires a level of crafting these days, because you can get internet everywhere.
I
And
know. Yeah.
I went to a coffee shop last week one morning. I'm under deadline right now, and I'm trying to meet a certain word count in order to live a more humane life, that doesn't involve trying to write 12,000 words in a day. So I'm trying to steadily write a certain amount every day. And I went to this coffee shop, and it said, ask for the Wi-Fi password. And I was like, aha, I'm not going to ask for the Wi-Fi password.
Yeah, but you know it exists.
Yes, I did.
That's really
That's
hard.
true. And
yes.
I said to myself, okay, my goal is 5,000 words today. I'm going to write 5,000 words, and then I'll ask for the Wi-Fi password. And
couldn't you tip somebody to promise not to ever give you the password?
Or block me. I'll tell them, just block this device. But no, I don't have a routine. My goal, my dream, is to have a writer's cabin in my own backyard. I want a cabin, and it would not happen in this current house, but I have this dream, and I've talked about my writer's cabin for like 20 odd years. My husband's heard it forever. I'm like, just buy me a lawn shed, just a she shed, like something. Just that's mine. Buy me a pop-up trailer. Buy me an old pop-up trailer on Craigslist and stick it out in the yard, But
I think it would be too close.
Well, in my writer's vision, it's tucked away like 10 or 20 feet into a woods off my property, kind of on property, but just far enough away to not hear an 8-year-old playing dominoes in the hallway, or a 15-year-old asking dad for the credit card to buy a game on the Steam network, like like that kind of thing.
Two readers have related questions. I think they're related. Maybe because of my reaction about them. But one wants to know, how much does it bother you to find editing errors after your book goes live? And the other says, when the cover image doesn't match the character description, how does it feel for the author?
Ooh. So the first one, it's terrible to find errors. It's no fun. And I have lots of layers of editing and proofreading built into my system. But I like to know when someone finds an error. So just so that it can be fixed. And with books, you can fix it and upload a new version quite easily. As for the cover, that's a tough one, because a lot of my heroines are curvy. They're, larger women, and finding non-exploitive, non-mocking images of heavier women, of curvier women, is very difficult. And occasionally I get complaints from readers who say, wait a minute, the heroine is a size whatever, or is, supposed to be curvy, and this model is stick thin. And then I explain the problem. And the thing with being a self-publisher is that we do have control over our images, but we don't have control over the databases of images.
What's available.
And I am, there more and more authors are doing custom photo shoots with photographers, which I think is fabulous if you can find the right model, if you can find the right photographer, if it works for you. But it's also quite expensive, and it depends on it. It also involves time, and I haven't gone that route yet. That doesn't mean I won't. It doesn't mean I'm closed off to it, but it's a question of time and resources, and where, and awareness. Like, I wasn't really aware of the idea of doing a custom photo shoot until fairly recently, but that's not going to solve the issue for most people. So I get it, though, because if you're very visual and you see a redhead on the cover, and the book description talks about the heroine being a blonde, that can be the lack of congruity can be a problem.
Okay, here's a great question from another reader. I would love to know where she came up with this question, but in the meantime, it's a great one. If you could write a book with any other author, alive or dead, who would you want to work with and why?
Wow, that's a good question. Write a book with someone?
That's what she asked. You want to
No,
edit the question?
no,
Is that
I'm
what
just trying to
revise the question?
that I can't think of anyone. And what I mean by that is there are plenty of books that I adore as a reader, but I'm not sure I would want to write them with the author, because once you know how the sausage is made, you don't generally want to eat it. Meaning, I think it might.
So you don't want to ruin the reading experience.
And so
that's interesting.
I don't think I have an answer to that. It's a great question. I just don't think I have an answer.
Okay, well, that you did answer. Yeah, that's great. Do you have a lot of? Well, I know you do. You said you interact with your readers a lot. What do you have stories about interactions with your readers and letters, comments? I'll tell you, one reader or one writer was saying that she has readers who send her chocolate.
That's great.
I want to get on their list. Yes.
Well, I have a chicken in one of my series, and her name is Mavis, and I get a lot of chicken stuff from my readers, and they're wonderful. I actually have a chicken mask that I wear when I go to book signings, and people can take pictures with Julia or Mavis, the chicken, kissing you. And so I get a lot of chicken videos linked to me on Facebook, and chicken pictures and chicken memes.
I didn't know there were chicken videos. I'm going to have to check
videos. Videos of chickens wearing sweaters, and videos of chickens doing things, and apparently there are people, you know how there are little dog strollers? Well, people walk their chickens in them, and I've seen those videos. And so I have a lot of, I've gotten some really beautiful reader art or objects. Like I got this really beautiful, ornately colored metal chicken sculpture from one reader that was lovely. I've gotten mugs.
Wow.
And so when I go to book signings, I have readers who bring me presents, and it's just really sweet. I had one when I was in London for a big book signing, and someone does book folding, which is an art. It's where you take and of course most readers are dying, like, what? You fold the pages? Monster. But it's a form of art, and it's where you take a book and you fold the pages to make a shape. It's like origami. And so in the end, these folded pages make a heart. And she gave this to me in this beautiful velvet sack, but it was just lovely. And so I have that. Mostly have the chicken videos and the memes from readers. I do have some of the nicest things that have happened with readers have involved some sad things. And what I mean by that is I will get people who will email me and say things like, I had back surgery and I was depressed, and I found one of your books and I started reading it. And now here I am 7 books later. Thank you so much for helping me to get through that point in my life, or things along those lines. And that's why fabulous. We do this. You know, those really are the moments that make it worth it.
Okay, let's take, if a reader has listened to this and has never read any of your books, where, to your mind, is the best place for them to start?
Okay, if they like romantic comedy, then Shopping for a Billionaire is it's lighter romantic comedy. It is silly, over the top, kind of. It's almost slapsticky. It's Janet Ivanovich, Sophie Kinsella kind of writing, with a few more serious issues floating through the series, but never heavy, never negative, like never super heavy or low. So Shopping for a Billionaire is, I think, a great book to start with. If readers like something that's a little more erotic but still romantic comedy, then my Random series is completely insane. And I really, it is bizarre. People 5-star it or 1-star it, so you're going to have an opinion either way. If you like romantic suspense, then my Meli Raine series, the Harmless series, A Harmless Little Game, is where I would start people. Even though there are 2 trilogies before that, that's the one that seems to be a good entry point for a lot of readers. But the Coming Home series, the first one's called Return, is another good starting point.
Do you find that readers, that you have a lot of readers who read both?
I have readers who read every single book I've ever put out.
That's fabulous.
Which is really cool. And I've asked them, I've said, well, but the writing is so different. And they say, but the voice is similar.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. That as an author, I find that really interesting. But I also have lots of readers who won't touch other pen names of mine. So I have people who will read all the Julia Kent books, won't touch anything else, or all the Meli Raine books, won't touch anything else. Or even within, I have people who will read the Shopping series and nothing else as of my Julia books. They will read the Random series and maybe my Obedient series and my Her Billionaire series, but they won't read Shopping. So even then, and I'm that way as a reader with some of the authors I love to read.
Mm-hmm.
I will read, like I love Diana Gabaldon's Outlander series, but I haven't gotten around to the Lord John novellas yet. And eventually I will, but I'm not in a rush.
I think a lot of it has to do with, well, kind of two different things. Worldview, and I think that's consistent. That's part of that voice. So if the author has a consistent worldview, I will often cross genres with them. And then it also has to do with what kind of taste you're craving right then.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that we open up books looking for an emotional experience.
Yes.
And, we read nonfiction for an intellectual experience, unless it's self-help, and then it's it's definitely a mix of emotional and intellectual. But we read for an emotional experience, whether it's, sometimes we read to hide from the world, to lick our wounds and kind of figure out how to bring our, overly stressed out selves down in a good way down. And sometimes we read to bring those stress hormones up for excitement, for, emotional power. Sometimes we do it to read for love. And so I think you're right. It depends on what what are you seeking?
For readers who want to know more about you, where's the best place to go? Do you have multiple websites, or is there a core home for you?
I would say my Julia Kent website, which is jkentauthor.com, J Kent Author. I think that's the best place. I do have a Meli Raine website, and we have a Diana Sear website as well. DJ Jennings does not have a website, but so there are websites for 3 of the author names. And the Julia, for anything related to Julia and Meli, you can find most of that at the Julia site. With Diana Sear, its own thing, and separate. And there's some great stuff there. My co-author does all the graphics and does all our covers. She is amazing and was a graphic design specialist back in the day.
Smart person to pick for your co-author.
That wasn't why.
Lucky person to pick for your co-author.
I'm the lucky one, yeah.
So we are ready for what I refer to as the epilogue. These are rapid fire, either or, one or the other choices. Okay?
Okay.
Here we go. Ice cream or cake?
Oh, ice cream.
See, I start off with an easy one because, daisies or roses?
Roses.
Cruise or trekking vacation?
Trekking.
Paper plates or best china?
Paper plates.
Ooh, that was harder than I thought. Day or night?
Day.
Opera or show tunes?
Show tunes.
House decorating or gardening?
Gardening.
Pickup or sports car?
Oh, pickup.
Hot air balloon or train trip?
Train.
Spring or fall?
Fall.
Cat or dog?
Dog.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Winter Olympics or Summer Olympics?
Summer.
Nail polish or bare nails?
Bear.
This is the last one. Grab the best first or save the best for last?
Save the best for last.
You are the first person to get through the entire either or without equivocating, asking for more, taking a third, doing. I am so impressed.
That's because I am an INTJ on the Myers-Briggs.
I am whichever letters doesn't remember the letters. Thank you so much, Julia Meli. This has been delightful. It's been a lot of fun. And I know the readers are going to enjoy it a lot. The listeners are going to enjoy it a lot. And really appreciate you taking the time. And hope all you listeners come back next week to hear another author and find out what trouble we can get into, which weeds we explore as we go along.
And thank you, Pat. I appreciate it.
That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclinn.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye. If you like this podcast, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter through our Patreon page. With a small monthly donation as little as $1 a month, you can help with the hosting and editing costs that make the show possible. To thank our Patreon supporters, we offer them special bonuses. Find out more at authorslovereaders.com or at patreon.com/authorslovereaders. That's PATREON. We also hope you'll subscribe to this podcast and leave us a review wherever you listen to us. Both of those help more folks find the podcast. Of course, the very best way for other folks to find the podcast is for you to tell them about it. So we sure hope you will.